I was jolted awake by a blood-curdling scream, the kind that makes your spine tingle and your heart race. But this wasn't just any scream. It belonged to Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed queen of Willow Ridge HOA, the woman who treated our peaceful neighborhood like her personal kingdom. I groggily pulled myself out of bed, peeked out the window, and there she was, her face redder than a fire hydrant, screeching like a banshee at the very edge of my property. But that wasn't even the best part. Her brand new luxury SUV, completely trapped, perched helplessly in the center of a massive trench, a trench I had legally dug around my driveway. And just to add a little dramatic flair, the trench featured a fully functional, medieval-style drawbridge that I could raise and lower at will. To an outsider, this scene might seem like something out of a ridiculous internet prank. But to me, this was justice. Because 2 weeks ago, none of this would have made sense. Back then, I was just Jordan Walker, a regular homeowner in Pine Haven, living in the modest house I had inherited from my grandfather, Samuel Walker. I wasn't looking for trouble. I just wanted to grill some steaks on the weekend, keep to myself, and enjoy my home. But peace was impossible when you lived under Karen's iron fist. Karen wasn't just an HOA president, she was a tyrant. The kind of person who measured your grass with a ruler, fined you for having the wrong shade of beige on your shutters, and sent threatening violation letters if your car had so much as a single speck of dirt on it. I had dealt with her nonsense before, but I never thought it would escalate into full-blown war. The trouble started one crisp morning. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and froze. There it was, Karen's massive, gas-guzzling SUV parked directly across my driveway. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she had just pulled in for a second to check her mail. But then I saw her. Karen stood smugly on the sidewalk, arms crossed over her chest, wearing that expression, the one she reserved for moments when she was about to make someone's life miserable. "Morning, Karen," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Your car's blocking my driveway." She smiled, the kind of smile a cat gives a trapped mouse. "Oh, I know," she chirped sweetly. "It's HOA business. We've had some complaints about your driveway." I frowned. "Complaints? From who?" She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "That's confidential, but after reviewing the concerns, we've decided your driveway doesn't comply with Willow Ridge HOA standards." I blinked, glancing at my driveway, a completely normal concrete slab. It wasn't fancy, but it wasn't breaking any rules either. "That's ridiculous. There's nothing wrong with it." Karen let out a fake sigh of sympathy, inspecting her nails like she wasn't even listening. "Unfortunately, the HOA board has the final say, Jordan." She shrugged. "Until we conduct a proper review, I'll need to keep my vehicle here to prevent further infractions." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. "You're joking." "Nope," she chirped, pulling out a clipboard and scribbling something down. "Oh, and just a heads up, if you try to tow my car, that'll be considered harassment. BOA rules." I clenched my jaw. I wanted to argue, to yell, to do something. But I knew Karen. She thrived on confrontation. She wanted me to lose my temper, just so she could slap me with even more fines and complaints. I took a deep breath. Fine, let's play. Because if Karen wanted to play dirty, I was about to play smart. For the next 3 days, my life became a waking nightmare. Every morning I stepped outside, half hoping that Karen had finally come to her senses and moved her SUV. But no, there it was, parked arrogantly across my driveway, blocking me in like she owned the place. I called the HOA, thinking that surely there had to be some kind of rule against illegally blocking someone's property. But all I got was the same smug response from their receptionist. "The HOA has reviewed the situation and determined that no violations have occurred." Determined no violations? What kind of nonsense was this? Fine. If the HOA wasn't going to help, I'd call a tow company. But the moment I mentioned that the vehicle belonged to the HOA president, the dispatcher hesitated. After a long pause, he finally admitted, "Sir, we actually have a community agreement with Willow Ridge HOA. We can't tow any HOA board member's vehicle without official approval." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "So let me get this straight. If I parked in front of Karen's house, you'd tow me in a heartbeat, but because she's the HOA president, she can block my property indefinitely?" A hesitant sigh came from the other end. "I don't make the rules, sir. I just follow them." Click. I stood in my living room staring at the phone in disbelief. She really had the entire system rigged in her favor. And the worst part? She knew it. Karen wasn't satisfied with just blocking my driveway. Oh no, she wanted to crush me completely. On the fourth day, I opened my mailbox and found a crisp white envelope. I already knew what it was before I even tore it open. HOA violation. Notice apparently since my driveway was not being used, I was now being fined for neglecting driveway maintenance. Are you kidding me? How was I supposed to use it if she had blocked it? The fines kept coming, one after another. Each day, a new charge appeared. A £100 penalty here, a $250 infraction there. By the end of the week, the grand total had climbed to over $1,500 in bogus violations. I could feel Karen watching from across the street, sipping her overpriced latte like she had just won the lottery. She strutted around the neighborhood, basking in her victory, knowing I was powerless to stop her. But that's where she underestimated me. I wasn't just going to roll over and take it. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I was about to play smart. That night, I sat in front of my laptop scrolling through dozens of pages of zoning laws, property codes, and HOA regulations. I was looking for something, anything that could turn the tables on her. After hours of searching, I found it. One single line in the local property ordinances that changed everything. There are no restrictions against implementing non-permanent security modifications on private property. I reread it 3 times just to be sure. And then I did what any sane person would do. I called my lawyer friend, Mark Callahan. Am I crazy, or does this mean what I think it means? I heard typing on the other end, then silence, then laughter. Jordan, I don't know whether to be concerned or impressed, but yeah, this is airtight. As long as it's not a permanent structure, you can absolutely make security modifications to your property. I grinned. That's all I needed to hear. The next morning, I rented an excavator. A few local contractors gave me weird looks when I told them what I wanted. A trench around your driveway? I just nodded and flashed a stack of $100 bills. Money talks. By sunset, my property was surrounded by a 4-foot-deep trench. Not a tiny ditch, but a full-blown medieval-style moat. It was wide enough that no car could drive over it. Karen came marching over, ready to gloat. But the second she saw her luxury SUV trapped in the middle of the trench, her face turned from smug to sheer horror. She stared, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What the hell is this?" she finally screeched. I sipped my coffee, barely suppressing a grin. "Oh, just some security modifications. HOA rules say I can do it." Her eye twitched violently. "You can't just dig a hole around my car." I shrugged. "Sure I can. This is my property. Since you refused to move, well, I had no choice but to build around you." She pointed a shaking finger at me. This is illegal." I calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out a printed copy of the zoning laws, and held it up. "Nope, totally legal. In fact, I even filed a permit, city approved." Karen's jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. "You're going to regret this, Jordan. The HOA will not allow this." I shrugged, turned on my heel, and walked back inside. But I wasn't done yet. The trench was just the beginning. Karen thought she had won. She thought she had all the power. But she had no idea what was coming next, because I had just started designing the drawbridge. Karen's jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might crack. "You're going to regret this, Jordan. The HOA will not allow this." I shrugged, keeping my expression calm. "Guess we'll see." With that, I turned and walked back into my house, leaving Karen standing there fuming, her face redder than a stop sign. But the best part? I wasn't done yet. The trench? That was just the beginning. If Karen thought this was over, she was in for the shock of her life, because I had just started designing the drawbridge. I was pulled from a deep sleep by the sound of furious banging on my front door. I already knew who it was before I even checked the peephole. Karen. She stood outside, looking like she had spent the entire night plotting my destruction. Her face was flushed, her fists clenched, and the second I opened the door, she jabbed a perfectly manicured finger at my chest. "You need to fill that hole in right now," she shrieked. I let out a slow, exaggerated sigh and took a long sip of my coffee, enjoying the way her eye twitched at my lack of urgency. "Oh, you mean the trench?" "Sorry, can't do that," I smiled. "It's a legal security measure." Karen let out a noise somewhere between a growl and a strangled screech. "You have exactly 24 hours to fix this, or I will make sure the HOA finds you into oblivion." I pretended to think about it, tapping my chin. "You know, that's interesting," I said, because I was about to make some more improvements. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "What kind of improvements?" I grinned. "A drawbridge." Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. You can't just put a drawbridge in a suburban neighborhood," she spluttered. "Sure I can." I pulled out my phone and tapped on the local zoning laws I had bookmarked. "As long as it's a temporary structure and not a permanent gate, I can build it. And since you're so concerned about my driveway, this will help keep it protected." Karen looked like she wanted to launch her clipboard at my head, but instead she let out a frustrated scream and stormed off. As she walked away, I could hear her muttering threats about city inspectors, lawsuits, and how I was going to regret this. Maybe. But I wasn't worried. I had done my homework, and for once I was actually looking forward to this battle. Over the next few days, I got to work. I gathered materials, hired a few skilled contractors, and started construction. The best part? I didn't even need anything fancy, just reinforced wood, strong metal hinges, and a pulley system. It wasn't rocket science. It was just old-fashioned problem solving. And every step of the way, I recorded everything, not just for proof that I was following regulations, but because I had a feeling this was going to be internet gold. Karen, of course, escalated immediately. She called city inspectors, trying to shut me down. But when they arrived and examined everything, they shook their heads. "He's not breaking any laws, ma'am." I swear Karen almost exploded right then and there. But she wasn't done yet. She tried rallying other HOA members against me. She went door to door, gathering signatures for a petition, but most of the neighbors were sick of her nonsense too. One elderly couple across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, even stopped by one afternoon to congratulate me. "Son, I don't know how you did it," Mr. Henderson chuckled, tipping his hat. "But that woman has been a nightmare for years. About time someone stood up to her." I smiled. "Well, I'm just getting started." By the end of the week, the drawbridge was fully installed. The whole neighborhood was watching as I tested it for the first time. I pulled the rope, and the bridge slowly lifted, leaving my driveway completely inaccessible to anyone without my permission. It was beautiful. "Karen," she lost her mind. "This is insane. You can't have a medieval fortress in the middle of the neighborhood," she screeched. I smirked. "It's not a fortress." I gestured toward the HOA rulebook she always carried around. "It's a security feature, for protecting my property. HOA rules encourage security improvements." Karen let out a strangled noise, spun on her heel, and stormed off. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Later that night, I was sitting in my living room enjoying a well-earned beer when I heard rustling outside. I peered through the blinds and immediately grabbed my phone. Karen was creeping around the edge of my trench with a flashlight. I hit record. "Looking for something, Karen?" I called out. She whipped around so fast she nearly lost her balance. "I was just making sure this ridiculous thing isn't a hazard," she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. "You mean trespassing? Because that's what it looks like to me." Her scowl deepened, but she quickly composed herself. "I have the right to inspect potential violations." I let out a slow chuckle. "That's funny because last time I checked, the HOA doesn't own my property." I held up my phone. "But don't worry, Karen, I'll be sending this video to my lawyer, maybe even posting it online." Her face drained of color. Without another word, she turned and hurried back to her house. The next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. People were starting to turn against her. In my video, it was about to go viral. Karen escalated her attacks the only way she knew how, by calling in city inspectors, hoping they would shut me down for good. She must have thought they'd show up, take one look at my drawbridge, and order me to tear it all down. Unfortunately for her, I had done my homework. When the inspectors arrived, they walked around the trench, took measurements, and reviewed my permits. After a thorough evaluation, one of them, a grizzled-looking man in his 50s, sighed and shook his head. "Everything checks out." Karen's face twisted with rage. "That's impossible," she shrieked. This is ridiculous. It's dangerous. It's unsightly. You have to do something." The inspector gave her a tired look. "Ma'am, he followed all zoning laws. There's nothing illegal here." Karen practically vibrated with fury, realizing she wouldn't get her way with the inspectors. She turned to the rest of the neighborhood, trying to rally support against me. She went door to door, trying to organize a petition to have me forcibly removed from the HOA. But the problem? Most of the neighbors hated her just as much as I did. People pretended not to be home when she knocked. Some openly laughed in her face. Mr. Henderson, my 75-year-old neighbor, told her straight up, "Lady, I'd rather sign a petition to get rid of you." Karen, undeterred, tried another tactic, blocking my contractors from entering the neighborhood. She figured that if she cut off my workers, she could stop me from finishing my drawbridge. But that backfired spectacularly when one of the contractors turned out to be the brother of a city councilman. The moment Karen tried to stop him, he made a phone call, and suddenly, she wasn't the one making the rules anymore. By the time the drawbridge was fully installed, the whole neighborhood was watching. It was a thing of beauty, a sturdy wooden platform controlled by a simple pulley system, allowing me to raise and lower it at will. I gave it a test run, pulling the rope and watching with satisfaction as the bridge lifted smoothly, leaving my driveway completely inaccessible to anyone I didn't approve of. Karen, of course, lost her mind. "This is insane. You can't have a medieval fortress in the middle of the neighborhood," she screamed. I grinned. "It's not a fortress. It's a security feature." I held up the HOA rulebook she loved so much. HOA rules encourage security improvements, don't they? Karen let out a strangled noise and stomped away, her fists clenched so tight I thought she might snap in half. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. That night I was woken up by the sound of rustling outside. Instantly alert, I peered through my blinds, my pulse quickening. There, standing on the edge of my trench, was Karen, armed with a flashlight, creeping around like some low-budget spy. My gut told me she wasn't just admiring my craftsmanship. I grabbed my phone and hit record. "Looking for something, Karen?" I called out. She whipped around so fast she nearly lost her balance. "I was just making sure this ridiculous thing isn't a hazard," she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. "You mean trespassing? Because that's what it looks like to me." Her scowl deepened, but she quickly tried to regain control. "I have the right to inspect potential violations." I chuckled. "That's funny because last time I checked, the HOA doesn't own my property." I held up my phone, making sure she saw the red recording light. "But don't worry, Karen. I'll be sending this video to my lawyer, maybe even posting it online. I'm sure the internet would love to see the HOA president sneaking around private property in the middle of the night." Karen's face drained of color. She hesitated for half a second, then turned on her heel and hurried back to her house like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. The next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Word had spread about Karen's midnight snooping, and people were finally starting to turn against her. She tried to spin the story, claiming she was just doing her job, but no one was buying it anymore. Meanwhile, my story was gaining traction online. The video of the trench and drawbridge had gone viral. Thousands of comments flooded in, praising me for standing up against HOA tyranny. Karen must have realized she was losing ground because she switched tactics. If she couldn't beat me with rules, she was going to make my life miserable in other ways. The fines started piling up. Unauthorized modifications to property, creating an unsightly structure, noise complaints, despite the fact that construction was already finished. It was pure harassment, but I had been one step ahead of her the entire time. For weeks, I had been quietly gathering evidence of her abuse of power, including records of her misusing HOA funds for personal expenses. And as it turned out, Karen wasn't nearly as careful with paperwork as she was with enforcing her petty rules. I compiled everything into a neat little folder, ready to strike when the time was right. And that time, it was coming soon. The neighborhood was still buzzing from Karen Whitmore's downfall, and for the first time in years, people actually felt free. Every time I stepped outside, someone would wave, give me a thumbs up, or ask if they could see the drawbridge in action. Even the mailman got a kick out of it, laughing every time he delivered my letters. I should have been enjoying my victory, but I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to let things go. She had spent years bullying this neighborhood, and she wasn't going to accept defeat without a fight. And sure enough, the storm came. At first, it started small. An anonymous complaint to the city about unpermitted construction. A zoning official showed up one afternoon, clipboard in hand, expecting to find some illegal structure he could cite me for. The second he saw the drawbridge, he blinked, smirked, and shook his head. This is what I was called out for? I handed him my permits and zoning approvals before he could even ask. He glanced through them, shrugged, and said, "Looks like you're in the clear. Have a good day." Karen must have been furious when she got the report back. Next came the fake complaints. Mysteriously, the HOA started receiving reports from concerned neighbors about loud construction noises at night, suspicious activity, and even claims that my trench was a safety hazard that could cause structural instability in the neighborhood. But here's the thing. I had security cameras. I knew exactly who was behind the complaints. Without solid proof, though, it was just another game of harassment. And then Karen took it up a notch. One night, I woke up to a loud crash. My heart pounded as I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. At first, I didn't see anything, but when I flicked on the outdoor floodlights, my stomach dropped. Someone had cut the ropes to my drawbridge. It lay half collapsed into the trench. The wooden planks cracked from the impact. I grabbed my phone, pulled up my security camera feed, and there she was. Karen, dressed in all black like some kind of low-budget ninja, holding a pair of bolt cutters. She had actually climbed into my trench and cut the mechanism herself. I didn't hesitate. I called the police. By the time they arrived, Karen had already fled back to her house. But it didn't matter. The footage was all the evidence they needed. The officers knocked on her door, and after a tense few minutes, she was dragged outside, still screaming about how she was being harassed and targeted. She tried to spin the story, claiming she was preventing a neighborhood hazard, but the cops weren't buying it. She was arrested for trespassing and property damage. Watching her handcuffed and stuffed into the back of a police cruiser was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. By the next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. It turned out Karen had been pissing off people for years, but no one had dared to stand up to her until now. Some neighbors admitted they had wanted to fight back, but were afraid of retaliation. Now that she had been publicly humiliated, the Willow Ridge HOA board had no choice but to take action. They held an emergency vote to remove her from the HOA entirely, stripping her of any remaining power. It was a unanimous decision, but that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, I received an email from an investigator handling HOA fraud cases. Apparently, Karen's financial misdeeds had caught the attention of the authorities. They wanted to interview me about the files I had presented during the HOA meeting. I handed over everything, every fine she had wrongfully issued, every shady financial transaction I had uncovered. Within a week, the investigation turned into a full-blown legal case. Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a full-on scam artist. She had been skimming HOA funds for years, using them to fund personal vacations, luxury purchases, and even some suspicious offshore accounts. When the news broke, the neighborhood lost its mind. People who had once feared her were now openly mocking her. Some even put up "free at last" banners on their houses. Her house went up for sale shortly after. But it sat on the market longer than usual because, well, no one wanted to buy the former dictator's residence. Eventually, she had no choice but to sell at a loss and leave town. The day she moved out, I stood at the edge of my driveway, watching as she loaded the last of her things into a moving truck. She shot me one last glare, but there was no power behind it anymore. She had lost. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast as the truck pulled away. With Karen gone, the HOA board crumbled. Most of the remaining members resigned, and the neighborhood voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. Turns out, people were happier without it. No more ridiculous rules, no more fines, no more fear of stepping out of line. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. As for me, I became a local legend. The story of the trench and drawbridge spread far beyond our neighborhood. News outlets picked it up. Before I knew it, I was being interviewed about my brilliant act of defiance. My videos went viral, and people from all over the world wanted to know more. Some even sent fan mail asking for advice on dealing with their own HOA nightmares. The drawbridge, now fully repaired, became a permanent feature. Kids in the neighborhood loved it, calling my house Castle Walker. I even installed a small plaque at the edge of the trench that read, "In memory of HOA tyranny." It made for a great conversation piece. One evening, as I was grilling steaks in my backyard, one of my neighbors stopped by. He was an older guy, had lived here longer than anyone, and had seen Karen's reign from the beginning. "You know," he said, watching the sunset over the now peaceful neighborhood, "I always thought someone would take her down eventually, but I never imagined it would happen with a trench and a drawbridge." I laughed, flipping the steaks. "Sometimes you have to get creative." He grinned. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. This place is better without her." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. "Yeah, it is. And for the first time since I moved in, I actually felt at home." The story of Jordan Walker versus HOA Karen Whitmore is more than just an entertaining tale of revenge and defiance. It's a powerful lesson about standing up for yourself, knowing your rights, and refusing to be bullied by corrupt authority figures. Many people in homeowners associations, HOAs, have experienced the frustration of dealing with power-hungry board members who abuse their authority, manipulate rules for personal gain, and intimidate residents into submission. However, this story proves that with knowledge, persistence, and a little bit of creativity, anyone can fight back and win. One of the biggest takeaways from this saga is the importance of knowing the law. Jordan didn't just react emotionally to Karen's unjust treatment. He took the time to research property laws, HOA regulations, and zoning codes. He played by the rules, but he played them better than Karen ever could. This highlights the significance of arming yourself with knowledge before confronting an oppressive system. Many people fall victim to HOA abuse simply because they assume they have no power. But in reality, most HOA rules have loopholes, and the law is often on the homeowner's side. The key is to know your rights and use them strategically. Another major lesson is that bullies thrive when no one stands up to them. Karen had spent years terrorizing the neighborhood, issuing unfair fines, and using fear to maintain control. No one dared to challenge her because they feared retaliation. But once Jordan took a stand, others in the community found the courage to support him. This teaches us that one act of resistance can inspire an entire movement. It only takes one person to expose corruption and turn the tide against an oppressor. If more people had resisted earlier, Karen's reign of terror would have ended long before. The story also emphasizes the power of documentation and preparation. Jordan didn't just rely on word-of-mouth accusations. He gathered hard evidence of Karen's corruption. He recorded her trespassing, saved every bogus fine she issued, and even compiled financial records that ultimately led to her legal downfall. This is an important reminder that when dealing with unethical individuals or organizations, always document everything. Emails, photos, videos, and official documents are the strongest weapons against abuse of power. Finally, this story is a testament to the idea that justice, though sometimes slow, always prevails. Karen thought she was invincible, but in the end, her arrogance and corruption led to her own destruction. She lost her power, her reputation, her home, and her ability to intimidate others. Meanwhile, Jordan not only reclaimed his freedom, but he also became a local legend, proof that when you fight for what's right, you don't just win for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been oppressed. At its core, this story teaches us that you don't have to accept injustice. If you educate yourself, strategize, and refuse to back down, you can stand up to bullies, and you just might change everything in the process. Did you enjoy this epic showdown against HOA tyranny? If you loved watching Karen get exactly what she deserved, make sure to smash that like button to show your support. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to deal with an HOA nightmare? What would you have done in Jordan's place? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new HOA Karen story. We have more unbelievable stories coming your way. Share this video with your friends who hate corrupt HOAs. Let's spread the word that homeowners deserve their rights. Like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned.